Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 26th of July 2021. I am joined by Mr. Andy Brockman, my amazing co-host, on Saturday morning because yesterday we were waiting on news from Stonehenge that was delayed, and here we are. So it's been a slightly interrupted Watching Brief schedule this week, but nonetheless we have some news with regards to Stonehenge, do we not, Andy?
We've got what, on the face of it, is some pretty momentous news.
Hmm.
This all started as you've just said. We had a watching brief all planned, and then on Thursday afternoon, I got a message from a contact in the campaign to the Save Stonehenge campaign, Stonehenge Alliance, which has been working with others to try and prevent what is called the short tunnel option
Hmm.
across the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site, which is a road plan promoted by the UK government and its roads agency, Highways England. Um, it has been going to what's called judicial review, which is a legal review of the plan.
Hmm.
And we were waiting on the verdict, and it was announced the verdict was going to be released on Friday afternoon, and that's what we were waiting for yesterday, because it was the release was due, and then it was due at 3 o'clock, and then it was delayed by an hour, and eventually we got the release around just before 4. And
Do we know why these things are so often late, and why these things are so often published at really blooming awkward times of the week? Because this isn't the first time that we've been waiting on something and it's just gone, well, we're going to publish at like 6 o'clock on Friday. Good luck, kind of thing. Um, is it because there are last minute edits? Is it because potentially there's awkward stuff in some of this stuff that people don't want eyes on, immediately? Or
I, I really don't know.
hmm.
You can speculate, for example, that because the verdict went a particular way, that the government wanted a heads up
Hmm.
before it was released. Wanted to have time to gather its forces and collate
Marshal its
it
evil
called
forces. No.
Marsh, 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 yeah, work out its press lines before the phone started buzzing.
Well, I suppose
Um, I
in this instance, actually, work out which rules it's going to rewrite in order to make sure that it is not actually breaking the rules.
You cynic, and I haven't even explained yet what's happened.
Oh yeah, no, you haven't, no. Also, what I should say as well, before
Mm.
we go ahead, is just to say, for my part, I'm neither for nor against the notion of a road through the Stonehenge landscape. I know you're a little bit more opinionated and cautious about the notion of especially the short tunnel option, and understandably. But there are just to be clear, there are archaeologists who are very vocally for the notion of this happening. This isn't archaeologists against the tunnel, and for my part, I try to sort of walk the line in between the two because I have to be the person with balance sometimes on this watching brief. Every now and then I can be the person who tries to bring a bit of balance.
I like to think on this one I'm pretty well balanced as well. In
Hmm.
that, shall I explain the background?
Yes, go ahead, go
Um,
ahead.
because that to our viewer, I mean, basically, this is a if you look back through the catalogue of watching briefs past, you'll see that we've covered this story consistently, effectively since we started.
Hmm.
The current arguments really began in 1995 when it was first suggested that a tunnel be built
Have we been
to
recording for
take
that
the.
long?
Sorry.
Have we been recording
We
since
have no.
1995?
We haven't. We're newbies to the Stonehenge tunnel
I was
rail.
11 years
Um,
old when I started.
yeah. Although if people want to remember it, I'm old enough to remember the Battle of the Beanfield. Google it if you don't know anything about the Battle of the Beanfield.
Battle of the Beanfield.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, look, we all know, we've commented many times on Watching Brief, and you've been suitably, shall we say, sceptical the at the role that Stonehenge plays in the British psyche and the psyche of the British media,
The
in
English
that
psyche,
everything is
particularly.
compared to Stonehenge or
Yeah.
whatever. Stonehenge is this absolutely iconic monument,
Mm.
twinned with another Neolithic site, primarily Neolithic site, Avebury, a few miles away. Stonehenge and Avebury form one of Britain's most high-profile World Heritage sites, and we'll come back to that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been long been perceived as a problem that the A303 trunk road, which is the trunk road which runs basically east-west along the width of the south of England, from London down to the West Country, runs within a few hundred meters of Stonehenge and is basically now too small for parts of the time, at least, for the amount of traffic that it's asked to carry. It's asked to carry not just local traffic, but also, as a trunk road, it carries freight and holidaymakers to and from the West Country. So it's a key strategic transport route, and it is a bit like the going past Stonehenge. It's a bit like the sand in an hourglass. It's the narrow neck of the hourglass that the traffic has to force its way through slowly sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1995, more or less, it was first proposed that the A303 was tunnelled under the downs at Stonehenge, and it was suggested as possibly a Millennium Project. That fell through for various reasons. It's gone through various iterations since, and in the early noughties, the then coalition government took a decision that it was going to build, again, a Stonehenge tunnel on this strategic route and upgrade the strategic route to the West Country. Most recently, the Highways England and the Department for Transport, which is currently headed by a cabinet minister called Grant Shapps, decided that they were going to go for what's called the short tunnel option, which meant that there would be a tunnel that burrowed under the downs, not under Stonehenge, as some people have mistakenly said on occasions, but taking the A303 under the downs near Stonehenge, close to Stonehenge, taking the stones out of the sight of traffic and vice versa. And then it would emerge in the World Heritage Site as a dual carriageway in cuttings, and there would be a strategic junction close to again, a very famous group of Bronze Age barrows on the alignment with the sunrise on the midwinter solstice. Right. And it's that plan, more or less.
Are the barrows in alignment, or would the junction be in alignment with the winter solstice?
Both will be in line with each other, and that's one of the problems.
Okay.
The argument is that the traffic and the lighting will be intrusive on the midwinter solstice.
I see. Yeah.
Which, of course, is that landscape is a ritual landscape amongst other things, and it's tied to solstices at various times of the year, summer and winter. And the arguments about how it was used and so on are ongoing among archaeologists and prehistorians. Discussions. Argument. I'm using argument in the academic sense.
People making their case. Yes.
People make their case, and other people make a counter case, and it's all proper. So that's where we were. The government had given that the go ahead. In fact, Minister Shapps had given that the go ahead, in spite of the fact that the World Heritage Committee, which is a part of the Unesco World Heritage Site mechanism, had said from the get-go that this wasn't a runner. It would cause irreversible damage to what's called the outstanding universal value of the site, to the extent that it was hinted this week, for example, by the current head of the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, that the site could lose its World Heritage status if this project went ahead. The planning inspectorate, the independent planning inspectorate, which is there to advise ministers, produced a lengthy report synthesizing lots of other lengthy reports and archaeological studies and panel recommendations and so on, recommending to the minister, that Grant Shapps, that he killed the project. That it wasn't viable because it wasn't acceptable, particularly in World Heritage Site terms. Um, Shaps, however, gave the go-ahead, which led the campaigners to form a group called Save Stonehenge World Heritage Site Limited, which sought a judicial review against the government of Shaps's decision, and they crowdfunded it. They employed the well-known legal firm, solicitors firm of Lee Day, who do a lot of public law work. They instructed Lee Day to bring this judicial review, which duly happened in June. And Mr. Justice Holgate, the Honourable Mr. Justice Holgate, who heard the judicial review, brain to mouth.
It's Saturday morning. It's okay.
Saturday morning. We don't normally work this. Yeah. Mr. Justice Holgate reserved what's called reserved his judgment, which is basically he didn't give a judgment on the day of the hearing. He reserved time to think about it, research it, and write it up. And that's what was released yesterday. Now,
and that was a PDF link that you sent me, and we'll include a link below in the video.
Absolutely. It's a 77-page judgment. It's a long judgment. It's a detailed judgment. It is a very interesting judgment, I think. Basically, although there were a number of grounds on which the Save Stonehenge Limited, Save Stonehenge World Heritage Site Limited, interrogated the minister's decision. In fact, it was upheld really only on two grounds. But as the judge said in his conclusions, either of those grounds legally were enough to kill, to make Grant Shapps' decision untenable legally. Essentially, the Highways England and the government made two fatal legal errors in the procedure for reaching this decision. One of them is that the minister wasn't given enough information and did not assess the impact on what are called the technical term heritage assets affected by the project individually. Instead, what he seems to have done is treat things as a group, and legally he wasn't supposed to do that. And we can ask why that happened. The judgment doesn't go into that. People need to understand that a judicial review doesn't look at every single aspect of a decision. All it does is look at specific legalities. It doesn't, and most particularly, and again, it's something people misunderstand about this project and discussion of this project. A judicial review doesn't take a value judgment about the project.
No.
It is purely about
examining the mechanisms by which the decision has been made and whether or not this stuff holds water. So, for example, at the moment, there's some talk about a potential judicial review at Sheffield, and that's unlikely to look at content of a decision as opposed to how a decision was made, isn't it? That's the difference. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yes.
So basically, as Mr. Justice Holgate said, the Transport Secretary wasn't given legally sufficient material to lawfully carry out what's called the heritage balancing exercise, which is required by two pieces of government policy. So on that one case, the quote, the effect of the legal error is that the planning balance was not struck lawfully. So that's one clause that would cause him to quash consent in the first place. There was a second clause, what's called ground, that the review was sought under, and that is that the minister and the Department for Transport and Highways England didn't properly assess the case for alternatives to the plan that Highways England put forward. Now, this is really interesting because, for example, the most recent consultation, which I think, if I'm right, was in 2018, people remarked at the time that only one option was being consulted on, which was the short tunnel, when in fact the World Heritage Committee and others have proposed either a longer tunnel, which would take would cause less damage or no damage to the actual ground of the World Heritage Site.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously that would be more expensive. Or, for example, alternatives like what's a southern bypass, which would take the road around the World Heritage Site completely.
Yes.
Though the judge made the judgment that those alternatives hadn't been properly assessed by the minister in making his decision. And in fact, he was quite scathing about it. I'm quoting here from the report. He said, in this case, the relative merits of the alternative tunnel options compared with the western cutting and portals, which is the most contentious part, were an obviously material consideration which the Secretary of State for Transport was required to assess. It was irrational not to do so. That's that's an ouch moment. And it implies.
Well, no. Sorry, you were just about to say what it implies, but what I was going to ask, therefore, was does this imply that there was a preferred solution already before the decision was even made? Does it imply that the government is trying to do something on the cheap? I know we've just said that this is not a review that will touch upon the substance of the decision. But I suppose legally, okay, why do those sorts of laws exist? If that's what I mean, do they exist in order to ensure that people are considering the merits of a project on more than just how much it will cost? In terms of it's about its environmental impact, its social impact, its infrastructure impact, and so on and so forth. Is that kind of what's going on there?
Yeah, all of the above. Government procurement, and particularly procurement at this kind of level, where you're talking about potentially, billions of pounds in overall project costs. The government legally has to be seen to act in a legal way, in accordance with the law, in accordance with its own policies, and in accordance with other legal mechanisms, for example, around that procurement is fair, that it hasn't been prejudged, as you were suggesting there, and certainly it has been suggested that, for example, the government tried to manipulate the process because it only ever wanted one solution, which was the one that was currently on the table and that SHAPS gave the green light to, when it was, in the eyes of many people, and even people who want to see the A303 moved or buried in a tunnel, that this was an option that pleased nobody except possibly the Treasury because it was the cheaper one.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So what does this mean then? Because yesterday I saw some archaeologists. I won't name them just because I don't want to embarrass them. Although I'm pretty sure actually this particular guy wouldn't mind really being named. More or less saying, have a tunnel or don't. Make up your mind. It's the whole poop or get off the pot type of thing. What is going on here? What will happen next? And is this actually, because I've also seen some people essentially celebrating the notion that, hey, the tunnel won't happen now. That doesn't feel as though that's the case either. I mean, surely there's going to be an option for review, a further review, or some sort of plea, as it were, from the government side on this. What is the next step?
Okay, let's start to unpack that, because as our viewer might have gathered by now, this is not an area where there are simple solutions, and often things aren't as they seem. Now, the baseline we'll start with is a comment by Rowan Smith, who is a solicitor with Lee Day, the firm that was instructed by the campaign, employed by the campaign, retained by the campaign, and instructed the barristers involved. And what Smith said is, quote, "This is a huge victory, which means for now Stonehenge is safe. The judgment is a clear vindication of our client's tremendous efforts in campaigning to protect the World Heritage Site. The development consent for this damaging tunnel has been declared unlawful and is now quashed, and the government will have to go back to the drawing board before a new decision can be made. Meanwhile, one of the country's most cherished heritage assets cannot be harmed. Now, yeah, that is objectively true. The government does have to go back to the drawing board. And in fact,
But does that mean that they can get away with basically just making some tweaks to their plan? When they say
well,
drawing board, this isn't necessarily from the ground up, is it?
that no, and what we need also to remember here is that a judicial review isn't the end of the legal options which are available.
No.
Either of the parties could choose to appeal. Now, whether an appeal would be worth it, as I said, the judge said that the minister made two fatal legal errors.
Hmm.
And either of which, it says in the conclusion of the report, either of which would have been enough to sink the project, to legally to kill the project.
Mm.
So they have to get over that one. And Paul Clifton, who's the BBC South of England transport correspondent, tweeted yesterday in the aftermath of the decision. My understanding is that the entire Highways England project will now be halted pending a government rethink. It's a substantial victory for campaigners who crowdfunded to bring the judicial review. Now, in terms of a rethink, that could mean putting all the other options back on the table, having them fully risk assessed, costed, and the minister making another decision, and that's not quick.
No.
The other thing that's in play here is that in the autumn we've got the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. And that is likely to lead to fresh policy initiatives to reduce carbon. Mm-hmm. And a prime case for reducing carbon is to reduce carbon produced by transport, and therefore roads. And that comes at a time
increasing
also,
a major trunk road's capacity, therefore, would be potentially going in the wrong direction on that. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, there was another judicial review of the Stonehenge project a few days ago, which reported, which was on climate grounds, and it found in the government's favour. So we're in a very fluid situation here. And it is technically possible for either party to appeal a judicial review, but you have to go to the Court of Appeal to seek permission to appeal. And as I say, on this occasion, there are two strong legal grounds that the judge found the minister was in error. So the chances of an appeal succeeding are probably not so good, and the government has to ask itself, is it worth spending a lot of public money on another court case which it may well lose again? So the situation we're in at the moment is the project is quashed, the consent is withdrawn. Quite what the effect of that on the works that have already been commissioned from archaeological companies like Wessex Archaeology is up for debate, and certainly.
Do you mean in so much as there could still be effectively preparatory archaeological investigations that could still happen?
Yes, there is work ongoing, and that work may be completed or it may be halted on Monday morning. We simply don't know at the moment. Certainly, in terms of the nuts and bolts of the project. Highways England claimed that there was £35 million of archaeological mitigation involved in bringing the project to completion. That is obviously now in question, and that will be a pretty big hole in the cash flows and employment prospects of archaeologists in the UK. This was a major project.
Is it worthwhile, therefore, just briefly speculating then on what this means for... So if this is all uncertain now, what this means for this notion of showcasing archaeology, in so much as quite a few people in the archaeological community have been saying, well, actually, this sort of project is really good because it demonstrates that archaeology can happen ahead of a major development. It won't stop the development necessarily, but it can augment it and make it so that it's done properly, done right, as it were. Uh, do you think now archaeologists need to try and find other high-profile instances? For example, there's some major roadworks, um, I think, planned in Scotland at the moment. There's, of course, HS2 is ongoing. Um, uh, how much of a loss is this potentially to that notion of a national showcase of archaeologists working, at the peak of professionalism?
At that level, obviously, it is a loss.
Mm,
There is, and again, there have been. What I think one of the sadnesses of this whole affair is the way that it's divided archaeology.
mm,
In that there have been a large number of eminent archaeologists who have sided with the campaigners, and largely academic archaeologists. It has to be said,
hmm hmm
and particularly and people with specialisms in prehistory, people like Mike Parker Pearson and so on. Um, the Certainly the arm's length organisations like Historic England, National Trust, uh, English Heritage Trust, which runs Stonehenge itself,
hmm
have been ambivalent to supportive. Um, and there are also other individual archaeologists who have said this is a fantastic project. As you say, it's a showcase. Um, I think personally, and I'm speaking, this is a personal opinion. It's not. I'm trying to see both sides of the story journalistically. Um, Personally, I think archaeology made a strategic mistake in thinking we can do this wonderful showcase project, which, yes, it can. It would have been state of the art. It would have been a massive employer. It would have helped the cash flow of large contracting units no end. It would have provided the kind of knowledge, in all probability, that people can build careers around,
mm.
the interpretation and dissemination of. Um, Archaeologically, it would have been a good, if you could divorce that level of research from the controversy around the tunnel, it would have been a fantastic research project on an internationally important site of outstanding universal value,
hmm hmm
right? I think the problem comes in archaeologists who saw that and then saw that as a justification in carrying on with the project or supporting the project,
mm.
because that was taken on board before all these legal processes were worked through. And when it was absolutely clear from the reactions of not just the the Stonehenge Alliance and the other campaigning groups, but also, for example, the World Heritage Committee, that there were major problems with this project and potentially major legal problems with this project. And I think I've just written an op-ed piece for the Pipeline, which we'll link to below. But one of the arguments I'm making there is that really, if archaeologists are to say that they're doing things as a public good, then an issue like this, which is about how we treat the most sensitive parts of our historic environment, the most important internationally, where what we do has a bearing on how people in other jurisdictions in other parts of the world might treat their World Heritage sites.
Mm.
And this comes again in a few days after Liverpool lost its World Heritage status because of planning decisions, which UNESCO have argued have damaged irrevocably the outstanding universal value of the Liverpool waterfront.
Mm.
Only the third time it's happened. Then the judicial review should not have been crowdfunded by members of the public. It should actually have been brought by our leading archaeological bodies, and particularly those bodies that advocate in public for archaeology and say that they are the guardians of archaeological ethics, the ones who publish the codes of practice and who take membership fees for enforcing those codes of practice and those ethics.
That is an opinion, though. That is definitely not not entirely balanced. In so much as But other people would make the other case, wouldn't they? They'd say, well, actually, what matters now is showing what archaeologists do, not showing that archaeologists are stick in the muds who don't want progress and all this kind of thing. Now, the thing is that flips back and forward in so much as
Mm.
progress as defined by one particular plan, as opposed to one of various options,
Yeah,
is not necessarily progress. It is a decision that's been made by someone else that you're deciding to back, or one is deciding to back.
yeah.
Um, do so this week, cards on the table. We were going to be doing a little bit of an overview of what we've been thinking about when we were at Petraria last week, and for various reasons it didn't quite happen. We'll probably do that this coming week instead. But one of the things that came out of that, in conversations that I had with people who were running the project, and also meeting people who were actually doing digging, was this fact that sometimes archaeologists are eager to make claims as to the benefits of archaeology that they're not necessarily fully qualified to make. Now, again, I'm not pointing any fingers. I could see the case in both directions. But for example, in this instance, it was people who maybe have been quoted or misunderstood, perhaps misconstrued. We should leave room for that. Misconstrued as suggesting that archaeology, for example, is a cure for PTSD. You go onto a site, you do some digging, and suddenly, veterans are, hallelujah, they're cured. Uh, with no handoff to tertiary services, so clinicians or community care and this kind of thing. It's just a case of a very intense moment of therapeutic action, shall we say, and then who knows what happens next. And archaeologists, we're not clinicians, we're not psychologists, we're not medical professionals, and sometimes or archaeologists have made claims that need to be further examined. Uh, were we at, I'm going to say were we at risk of doing something similar in this instance? And it seems potentially in a similar vein to that which we've seen surrounding battlefields, etc., in recent years as well. This balance between, I suppose, as you're suggesting, archaeologists positioning themselves as asking the question of public policy: is this damaging to the historic environment? That, I think, there's a straight line between our qualifications and our public voice. But to what extent should we have the ability to make comments on, for example, economic value, or even frankly PR value of a project, when actually the decision has other options? There are other routes in this case in Stonehenge. I know that's quite a long-winded and rounded question, but I suppose what I'm saying is, are we qualified to understand what's happened here? Do archaeologists actually understand this or not? And I'm asking that quite openly because, as I say, in the context of some other interactions with fiscal policy, public policy, and mental health policy, so on and so forth, archaeologists sometimes stray into making slightly hippie-ish claims, slightly unfounded statements that sometimes get them into a little bit of trouble.
That's a really, really interesting point. Uh, I think it is arguable
Hmm.
that certainly in the case of Stonehenge, and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of archaeology as therapy and so on at the moment. We can
No.
save that for another day. And
Yeah.
there's some very valid questions to be asked there.
But it just
Um,
fired some connections. That's all for me. I just thought it was.
no, I understand why you're asking.
Hmm.
I think in this case, well, several things. One is that archaeology cannot exist as an ethical bubble outside of the influences of the real world as it is lived by non-archaeologists, including politicians, economists, and so on.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it therefore is a duty of archaeologists to try and understand the world in which they're operating, and where there are questions about whether those operations are legal and ethical, as there have been on, over the Stonehenge tunnel and dueling. Wherever you stand on the need for it, there are clearly questions about how this has been carried out. And a judge found that the minister acted unlawfully on two separate grounds, either of which was enough to make his consent non-valid.
Regardless of the benefit for public understanding of
Regardless of the
archaeology. Yeah.
regardless of the benefits of to the local people, to the
Mm,
archaeology, to everything else, on purely legal grounds, as was telegraphed by a number of people before this started,
mm,
this was legally very questionable.
mm,
How this was done was legally very questionable.
mm,
And I think, therefore, questions have to be asked about the judgment of the archaeological bodies in particular who went along with it as far as they did. I think in the worst case, sorry, in the best case, it looks like they were used as greenwash,
mm.
and in the worst case, you can argue they were complicit in an unlawful decision by government.
Okay. Yeah. And again, we're not going to name names or go through that stuff. I mean,
No,
that conversation is unfolding at the moment, but
indeed.
it's interesting, and I should just reiterate, for my part, I'm not. I think, as I've already said before, there's a road there already. It's one of those things where actually we can't undo the fact that traffic travels through that landscape. And so the question of
Yes.
mitigating it somehow with the tunnel, actually, arguably, is quite compelling in various ways.
Mm.
Whether this tunnel happened or not, how it happened, is probably more important. But also, what I think what I've always found most intriguing from an archaeologist's standpoint is this question of of the fact that it that that criticizing um, uh, the mechanism became an archaeological issue
Mm.
as opposed to being archaeologists together, sort of saying, well, what is best for the historic landscape? What are the other options? And maybe encouraging, as you say, maybe some of the named groups, possibly encouraging government to take another look at the other tunnel options. Uh, not stopping the work, maybe even, God forbid, adding to the budget. If those 35 million reasons is high on your agenda, maybe, yeah, lobby to get the budget expanded so you can get a better tunnel that doesn't damage the landscape quite so much. I suppose just you know, sorry. So my point being is that I'm like I say, I've been trying to walk a line all the way through, and it's been very difficult to watch this conversation.
Mm.
I suppose just finally, is there a loss potentially here in terms of sampling? Because some people have made, again, some archaeologists. I don't I run the risk of sounding Trumpian. Some people have said, I heard, I don't know about you, I didn't know, but some people have said, yeah. Anyway. Lots of archaeologists have made the case in conversations that I've had both privately and publicly, that actually the tunnel was effectively a sample. It was a good opportunity to sort of, to bore through, yes, the heritage, protected the World Heritage Site, but nonetheless, as you do that, understand, possibly even right the way down to, to Ice Age levels, um, everything that happened leading up to Stonehenge, and possibly find some new graves, new environmental markers, artifacts, so on and so forth. Have we lost something here potentially in terms of that sampling aspect? So putting aside the ethical and the moral questions as to how archaeologists proceed and what our reach should be in the context of public and civic engineering policies, is this actually a loss in terms of the potential gain, or is actually, am I asking a question that's just archaeologically daft in so much as we never know what we're going to get? so, so until the present is unwrapped, we don't know what's in there. So actually, is that a question that's Schrodinger's dig, isn't it? That's an archaeological excavation that is and isn't happening. Yeah,
Okay. Wrapping this up
yeah.
and answering that question. Uh, and again, it's a personal view, but it's one I'm prepared to argue. Um, I think, I used to live in Salisbury,
Hmm.
just down the road from Stonehenge. I know that road really well. I know that area really well. And in transport terms, there are questions that need to be asked, both nationally and for local people.
Mm.
And in fact, we had the local MP on the Radio 4 Today programme just before we started recording, saying he was deeply disappointed by the decision yesterday on behalf of his constituents, and he hopes the project will go ahead as it was the best option that was available. And that may be a government line that he's been given, but it's a view.
No, but also fairly early on, he was making the case that it would be good for business and this kind of thing, wasn't he? So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. In terms of the archaeology is still there. The archaeology would have been there even if the tunnel project wasn't on the table. What has gone is the potential to fund research archaeology. If a group wants to apply for lottery funding or whatever to do that work or parts of that work, it can still be done even if that project never goes ahead. So I think we have to divorce the archaeology from the project. And when it comes to the project, it's not gone down. As I said earlier, the judicial review was not about a value judgment about the project. It's certainly not a value judgment about the archaeology. And it should not be seen in those terms.
No.
It was a judgment about the legality of the minister's decision. And the minister's decision was found to be unlawful twice. And I don't think archaeology should be associated with unlawful decisions.
Okay. I suppose hypothetically, then, if someone was to Heritage Lottery Fund or otherwise fund a sampling transect across the landscape, because presumably digging a tunnel just for sampling would be bizarre, just go straight down and through. The irony there is that actually there'd be an awful lot of work that would go into expressing and demonstrating the benefit of doing that work in a historic landscape environment. So yes, I mean, you're right. There is the ministerial decision. That's the reason this has fallen through, and in that sense, the value of the archaeology to a certain extent is neither here nor there, because the project was always fundamentally flawed by the decision-making process. But also the very fact that if you were to do this in any other way, you would have to be meticulous in demonstrating benefit and also demonstrating how you weren't going to damage the site, really also shows that it all required careful thought at every stage, and simply saying, "Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be great," is, well, it's not enough. Basically, it's not enough. From a dispassionate standpoint, that is not enough. So I guess we'll see what happens next. For now, I suppose the Save Stonehenge folks will be happy might be the wrong word, but they'll be celebrating this decision. They'll be pleased that that their efforts have led
I think
somewhere.
actually, particularly after earlier on in the week when the other challenge failed, they were actually somewhat surprised yesterday when they actually won.
No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the other thing I think we can be pretty sure of, we'll be discussing this again.
Well, with that in mind, I'll let you go and get on with your Saturday. It's a conversation with the in-laws, and I'm going to go and actually I'm popping to a friend's house to lift weights in their garage. So yes, we are attempting to get henge. Until next time, guys. Thank you for watching. Do take care. Bye bye.